Good afternoon. I'm Denise Anthony. I'm the director of the Institute for Security, Technology, and Society here at Dartmouth. And I'd like to welcome you to our third event in our series this year on cybersecurity and national security. It's jointly sponsored by ISTS and the War and Peace Studies program at the Dickey Center for International Understanding. So I'd like to thank my partner in crime at the Dickey Center War and Peace program, Dll. And I'd also like to thank ISTS Associate Director Tom Camden and Program Administrator Karen Page for their help in organizing the sessions. In the fall, we had a fascinating panel talking about the potential for and possible implications of cyber war and national security. And just a few weeks ago, we had Kim Zetter talking about Stuxnet and the implications for national security. And today, we are very happy to welcome Dr. Gary McGraw to talk about cyber war, cyber peace, stones, and glass houses. Dr. McGraw is the Chief Technology Officer of Dll Incorporated, a software security consulting firm. He is a leading authority on software security. He has over 100 publications. He's the author of 8 best-selling books on this topic. Best-selling books on cybersecurity. That's kind of a fun thing to say together. Including the titles Software Security, Exploiting Software, and I like this one best, Exploiting Online Games. He's also the editor of the Addison Wesley Software Security series. He writes a monthly security column for Search Security and Information Security magazine. And I think a number of us know him from the monthly Silver Bullet Security podcast for IEEE Security and Privacy magazine. Dr. McGraw has a dual PhD in cognitive science and computer science from Indiana University, and we are really happy to welcome him today. And just before he comes up to speak, I wanted to make sure everyone in the audience knew that at 6:15 today, this is particularly for the students, in Haldeman 125, there will be an opportunity for pizza, and more important than that, a conversation with Michelle from Dll about opportunities for internships and job opportunities. So 6:15, Haldeman 125, dinner and employment. Like
free pizza, man. Who cares
so, Gary.
Hi, everybody. So I give a whole bunch of talks all the time, but I've never given this talk before, so it's a little bit nerve-wracking, so you're going to have to help me out here. Usually I'm talking to fellow geeks, and I know that there are some fellow geeks in the audience here, but I also know there's some other sorts of people. And so what I want to do is make sure that you feel comfortable with this size crowd. We can do this. Just, ask questions, raise your hand, make snide remarks, whatever. Just expect it back. And we'll have a good time with this work. I work for a company called Dll, and I want to kind of tell you where I'm coming from. Most of our work is for multinational banks, and the other biggest part of our work is for independent software vendors like VMware and Intuit and so on. And so what we're used to doing is working on very big software where bits are either money, or they're the way you make your money, or the way you move stuff around that is the equivalent of money. And so, I don't really do stuff for the government. So I'm here talking about some work that I did jointly with a guy named Nate Fick, who it turns out is now a trustee here at Dartmouth. Who knew? And he's going to come for his first meeting tomorrow. It's too bad he didn't fly up early. We just figured this out like yesterday. And it's a funny story how this all happened. But Nate is a guy who is a warfighter, is a classics major from Dartmouth, has an MBA from Harvard, super amazing guy, actually. And he started a think tank maybe 4 years ago, and now it's a huge, big think tank in Washington, and it's affecting policymakers. And so he had a meeting to talk about cybersecurity. As you know, cybersecurity is a really hot issue in the government. And you see that Sometimes in the Washington Post, that's my local paper, so we sort of get the inside the Beltway thing all the time. There's a lot of interesting information, let's just put it that way, that's published about about cybersecurity, about what it is, what the implications are, what some examples are. And as a person who does computer security all day, all throughout the planet, some of these stories just were wildly wrong and crazy, right? And so these wildly wrong, crazy stories are being told to people that are, running stuff like senators and representatives, and they're busy and they're not all that clever and stuff, and so they're getting the feed that's just crazy wrong stuff, and that's worrisome. So Nate and I decided to write a paper about some of these issues, trying to get some clarity here, and maybe give some ideas about what we ought to do about this. And this talk is based on that joint work with Nate. A little bit more about me. So the kind of computer security that I do in the world is called software security. You might have also heard something called application security, but I like to call it software security. It's a pretty new paradigm in security. Computer security in the beginning was pretty simple. There was some broken stuff over here and some bad people over here, and the idea was to put a thing between the broken stuff and the bad people. Anybody know what that thing is called? This is the interactive part, yeah. Firewall, good, that's right. Do firewalls work? Not really. I mean, you might as well have one, but it doesn't do much to really protect you. And so some of us came along in the mid-90s and said, we just have a really simple question. How come the stuff's broken anyway? And there was no really good answer to that. Where does the stuff come from? Well, software people write it. They make it, And so that's where this field of software security kind of came from. I got started in it when Java came out. We were breaking Java an awful lot. And it made me wonder why these amazing uber mega super geeks screwed it all up when it came to security. So if you stand way back from computer security and you look at the whole landscape, what you see is that software security and this idea of building things properly as the only way to do this accounts for maybe 1/10 at most of the computer security market. A majority of, but it's it's growing. So we've probably, I think I would estimate $700 or $800 million now worth of revenue every year for tools and services and stuff in software security. Now, if you put that up against the computer security marketplace, which is about $14 billion, you see that it's just, it's maybe like one of the fingers if you hold up all your fingers. So it's a growing part of computer security, but a pretty new paradigm. And that's an important point because, when you think about the government, it's not like the government is known for its massive innovation, right? Is that Apple or is it the government? What do you think? Right, so the fact that the government may be looking at some older paradigms for computer security that have sort of shown us that they don't really work very well, like firewalls and antivirus and so on, shouldn't be too surprising. It's a little disturbing, but it's not surprising. So what I'm talking about today is really new to the government and fairly new to what you might call enterprise security or corporate security. And that's kind of that's going to be the, building stuff right is the take-home message here. So there are a couple of questions that we want to answer right up front. How much of the cyber war talk is hype? Let's talk about some cyber war stories, and let's figure out whether they're true or false. Now, all of the stories that get repeated a lot. We know that, but that doesn't really make them true. And so what's real and what's cyber chimera, and how do we separate these things apart? And that's kind of the first thing we did in our paper. So I have a little list. I took some of the stories and put them under the hype column, and then there's some other stories that are under the reality column. The hype column is the most fun, of course. So who's heard of the Ddos attacks in Estonia? Just a few people. Yeah, right. So, let's imagine Estonia. How do you suppose they're connected to the internet? Massive, huge fiber trunks. What do you think? Massively connected? What do you guys think? Couple T3s. They're connected, but they're not massively connected. Now, how's Google connected to the internet? What do you think? Couple 2, 3 T3s? Yeah, right. I think they have all of Oregon, so where they're generating electricity to run the grid. So the point here is that people say, well, there was this thing with the Russians, and the Russians did a DDoS, and it shows that cyber war can take a whole country down. And you're like, dude, Estonia, right? And what would happen if you took that very attack and you aimed it against Google or Amazon? What do you think? Absolutely nothing. I mean, absolutely nothing. They might not even notice. They have their look down here at their pinky toe and they go, oh, look, a little ant down there. And they would take care of it immediately. In fact, they have automatic stuff set up to take care of some of that stuff.
I have reasons to believe that not many people in Estonia noticed either.
Yeah, right. Maybe they didn't, so that's even better.
I'm an admin at a game that has a lot of Estonian players. I don't think there are that many of them.
So it didn't even go down. All right. Even better. I love it. So there are many reasons why talking about this as an example of cyber war is, hyperbole at best and misleading at worst. And I got to tell you that every single person in Congress who talks about cyber war and gets quoted, that's what they talk about first. That's worrisome. And there are a couple others. The Brazilian blackout story was on 60 Minutes, and that turned out to just be an administration error. And my favorite one of all was when China hijacked 15% of the net. You remember that story? Did you guys see that one go by? Yeah, that was just a BGP error. Like an administrative screw-up that wasn't done maliciously. And all that it shows is that the Border Gateway Protocol is screwed up. And we've known that for how long, Sean? A while. Decade, 15, 20, long time. Still screwed up, built it wrong. So we can make mistakes with it, and sometimes the mistakes can wipe whole countries off the map accidentally, temporarily, and we put it back. And that is not cyber war, nor is it a preparation for cyber war, and yet the fearmongers grab a hold of that and they sort of hype it up immediately. So we got to watch out for the hype. And I got to tell you, there's nothing that turns off real geeks more than a hype story like that. Somebody says a hype story to you as a geek, you sort of go, oh, surely you know better than that, right? And you immediately sort of discount everything they say. So the communication between policymakers and actual people who know what they're talking about when it comes to the internet isn't very good. In fact, it's pretty darn bad. And the people that end up talking about these things are sometimes people who were a bureaucrat who got tapped to do a job, and all of a sudden they became a cyber expert by sitting in the chair, right? Which is not much of a qualification for being a cyber expert. So those are some of the hype things. There's some real things too, though. And I want to talk about these real things because there's something that we can do, a move we can make, which may help us distinguish some attack on the net or cyber crime or cyber espionage versus cyber war, right? And so the theory is that if there's a kinetic impact, that's a war, right? Or if it happens during wartime, we're going to give it that too. But this kinetic impact idea can be used to distinguish some of these stories over here. The Soviet gas pipeline explosion, so the Soviets bought some software from Canada, from a Canadian contractor, and apparently the CIA had put a Trojan in there. Yes?
Bought.
Yeah? What?
Bought.
Borrowed, whatever. Okay, they didn't they buy it?
Nope.
Oh, they borrowed it. Right, so, but it had a Trojan functionality in it, and which caused the pipeline to explode, and you could see the explosion from space. I mean, big. See that? Largest non-nuclear explosion. That is a kinetic impact. Okay? So blow some stuff up. Usually if you do that to somebody, they get mad and they bomb you back, right? But in this case, it was a cyber attack and whatever, hush hush. They didn't because they forgot to pay for the software, right? So
It was, I mean, the farewell this year, obviously.
all right. 2007, the Israelis attacked the nuclear reactor that was being built in Syria by the Koreans, the North Koreans. And before the attack, the Syrian air defenses, which were fairly formidable, just turned off. So the planes just flew right in, bombed the bejesus out of the thing, and flew right back home before the thing turned on again. That's a kinetic impact. Blew the bejesus out of North Korean reactor thing, right? Because, well, they put it above ground that time. They learned their lesson, right? 2008, Russia invades Georgia. I got that backwards. And while they were doing the invasion with actual tanks and guys and guns and killing people and burning houses down, they also carried out a cyber attack against the infrastructure of Georgia. In particular, they were taking down websites that were talking about the invasion, and they were taking down the banking system and some other stuff. So that was, a cyber attack coinciding with an act of war. That's probably war, wouldn't you say? Right? So, and I don't think they were necessarily going after command and control, but we could pretend they were. I suppose we don't really know. Now, here's one that's iffy. And this one gets talked about a lot because there's not really any kinetic impact here as far as we know, but it's something that really happened during wartime and an enemy foisted on us. And that was an infected USB drive that got into the command and control system in Iraq and made its way all the way to global command and control in Florida. And it was like a massive infection of the US command and control system by the enemy. And Bill Lynn talked about that in a famous paper and said, hey, cyber problem. So a lot of people cite that one. Now, I guess we can put it in the reality side. It really happened, and it really is an example of an attack you can carry out during wartime, but there's no kinetic impact. That's why I'm a little iffy on it. What's that? Was it really an attack? Well, it really was being used to compromise systems which could then be used for other stuff. Yes? Do we know who developed it? No. I don't think we know. Actually, we probably do know, but they kept that part classified.
Does it start with G?
Does who start with G? Does the Georgians, yeah. So, and then there's Stuxnet, which Kim came and talked about a couple weeks ago. I'm going to tell you some stuff about Stuxnet. Stuxnet's being held up as like this big, unbelievably scary, scary thing. And you know what, guys? It is a scary thing, but it's just not that complicated. And that sort of sucks, right? Because all of us geeks who run around wearing tinfoil hats, we say stuff like, hey, the command and control system could go down for, the whole power grid. That could go down. And people are like, yeah, sure. You paranoid geeks, put your hat on and go back away. And Stuxnet actually helps us gain a little bit of credibility. See, we told you that stuff like that could happen. And not only could it happen there, but it could happen here, and it could happen all number of different places because the people who built that software were not thinking about security. In fact, most developers don't think about security when they're building stuff. If you attack their software, which we get paid to do a lot, you break their software with something simple like putting a terabyte in a name field. And most developers would say, well, who has a terabyte long name, man? Who would ever do that? Now, things are getting better, but 5 years ago, nobody has a terabyte long name. You're not supposed to do that. Why'd you do that? We still get a lot of that. You're not supposed to do that. It's like, duh, we're the bad guys. Of course we're not supposed to do that. That's why we did it. And they have to think, oh, right, did it, bad thing on purpose. Seriously, here's why. This is my theory. Developers build some of the most complicated artifacts that we've ever dreamed up on this planet. And somebody comes to them and says, hey, we have a nothing so far. We have a blank slate, and we'd like you to build this thing that does all this complicated stuff, and nobody's ever done it before, but how about it? And they're like, I'm on it. Right? Those are optimistic people. And optimistic people, when you break their stuff, they sort of look at you like you killed their puppy. I mean, it's sort of sad. But we need to do a better job teaching people who are building our systems that we're counting on to work to think about what happens when bad things are foisted at their system. We need them to explicitly consider that while they're building stuff. So more about that at the end of the talk. All right, let's talk about Stuxnet a little bit. I know maybe not everybody was in that talk a couple weeks ago. And who was? Let's just put it that way. About a third. All right. So Stuxnet basics. Stuxnet had two major parts. Delivery vehicle, which infected the NANTAZ centrifuge system, which was doing uranium enrichment in Iran, and a payload part, which was what got into the Siemens control system and actually screwed around with the control software that was controlling centrifuges that were twirling around and made them wobble and fall apart and kill a few people as a side effect, a few engineers. That's what I heard last week. And so obviously a kinetic impact. Now, in the beginning, it seemed like, oh, malware of the day, right? Symantec was talking about it, and everybody was talking about these 0 days, and they said there were 4 0 days. There was actually 1 0 day, 3 attacks that have been used a lot in the wild that everybody knows. And, so that whole thing about 4 is bullshit. Stolen private keys, that was true, but they were the keys of some useless organization. And then the most interesting thing was the delivery mechanism involved infecting the contractors in Ukraine that were going to go over, and I think it was Belarus. It's Belarus, right? It was either Ukraine or Belarus, who were going to go over to Iran and work on the Bashir nuclear power plant and the centrifuge system. And so they just infected their stuff in their country, and the contractors brought the infection with them on a USB or an infected laptop and plugged it right in. So that was the delivery mechanism. The delivery mechanism was marginally interesting, and it was just pretty much standard issue malware. So this is stuff that we have come to expect out there in computer security. Yes?
So, do you want questions during the topic?
Sure, yeah.
So, do you know the source of, you mentioned Kim Zetter. So,
yeah.
How did she get this wrong about 4 0 days? Like,
because Symantec wrote that in their report, which was wrong.
I see. How did they mess that up?
They don't really know what's going on in the real underground, is my theory, right?
So they just weren't aware that those things were already
Yeah. I mean, there are ways to know who wrote Stuxnet now. And so whatever, whatever. Well, let's skip that part. All right, so the interesting part about Stuxnet is the payload, which went after a control system. And a control system there's a PC controller that has a serial connection to a device that tells the centrifuge how to spin. And Siemens it was a pretty old device. I can't remember the exact number. I think it was a 135. There were a couple of different controllers, and the payload was sophisticated enough to make sure that the configuration of one of these and at least 100 of those was right. Of course, it turned out that pattern of one controller like this and more than 30 of the other kind didn't only apply at NANTAZ, right? It also applied at Pipeline in Finland, and a few other countries that start with an I had some stuff that also had a similar pattern. And lo and behold, there was a setup in Israel that had exactly the same pattern too, which was probably what was used for testing the payload before it got delivered, right? So here's a funny story. So this is how the world works in high-tech land. I guess before Stuxnet got discovered in 2010 and outed, it was probably around in 2009, everybody thinks. I went to Siemens in January, and I helped them kick off their software security initiative. They got all their global CTOs, and we talked about the importance of software security and how to do it and how they should get measured and blah, blah, blah. We were very excited at Cigital because Siemens is a huge company. We're thinking, yes, we can do tons of consulting. Of course, but they're very German, right? So they're like, now we do the planning phase. And we were like, yeah, but you should move. There's some stuff you could do right away. You can start training your guys. We are doing the planning. When we do the planning, then we do the execution. Right? So I guess in September, 8 months after that talk, I was sitting in the room when Ralph Langner, who was at my house on Sunday, by the way, revealed that the payload was aimed at Siemens systems. He ran Wireshark on a little pile of Siemens stuff that he had in the lab. Pretty straightforward way of finding it. And he, for the first time, told anybody on planet Earth. There were about 30 of us. And I was sitting right next to, it was at Joe Weiss's meeting. I was sitting right next to Peter Bernholtz. Bernholtz? I can't remember his last name. Peter from Siemens. And he just went, oh, shit. And he got up and, out the door, make a few quick calls. So the planning phase ended, right? And then it was the crisis mode phase, which has continued on until about now. And the problem is that even if we know these systems are broken, we can't fix them. Like, maybe we could patch some of the software, maybe we could put a little crypto control, make sure DLLs aren't being overwritten, and some other stuff. But the problem is that if you go to some people like the power grid people or the control systems people, they have a different economic cycle than we have in high-tech land. So in high-tech land, we think, well, God, your computer's 2 years old? What a piece of crap, right? And you go into control system land and you go, hey, that thing's 5 years old. What the heck? You're using a 5-year-old thing? And they're like, yeah. And we expect another 9 years of service out of that, which is wild, because their budget cycle's 14 years or so. So even if they do decide they have to get new stuff and swap it out, it's going to be a while before that happens just because that's the way the capital structure of their business is set up. That's what people are referring to now, I guess, cleverly as forever days, right? Things that we know, it's a problem, it's in there, everybody knows about the problem, but we can't fix it for one reason or the other, usually economic reason. And so, we're going to see more and more of that. Here's the really interesting thing about Stuxnet. So a little aside, right? You mentioned the online game stuff. You'll see why I'm doing this aside in a second. I wrote this book with a guy named Greg Hogland on online games. And Greg came to me and he was like, we'd already written a book called Exploiting Software, and that thing, it sold like crazy. It was crazy how it sold. We hit number 16 on Amazon and stayed there. Not of tech books, of like all books. It was who's that guy who wrote the Liars, Liars, Damn Liars? He's a senator now. That guy's book was number 15. Franken. We really wanted to bump Franken off. But sadly, Franken was our glass ceiling. So Greg came to me and said, hey, I've been working on this World of Warcraft stuff. It's really cool. Let's write a book. And I was like, dude, I'm supposed to be a serious business guy. Like, how am I supposed to write a book about games and have the people in Wall Street pay any attention to me? And he goes, yeah, whatever. Just look at this code. And I looked at the code and I was like, wow, that's really cool. And then I started thinking about online games and realizing that they're just a peek into the future of the way software is going to be designed and rolled out. Because you're talking about tens of millions of users connected simultaneously with 9 or 10 gigabyte client globs on their desktop, all sorts of state being passed around asynchronously, time and state stuff all over the place. And not only that, the economies of some of these things are larger per capita than the economies of some actual countries per capita. That's why there's gold farming. You ever wonder why there's gold farming? Why there are people who play games all day? It's because you can make more value on planet Earth playing a game and conjuring up pretend gold from the orcs than you can making shoes for Nike. Really. And that's kind of crazy.
And money laundering.
And there's money laundering. Yeah, I used to say that money laundering was a theory, but the Secret Service guys came to me after a talk I gave in Pittsburgh, and they were like, not a theory, happens all the time. That's one of the steps, every time. Right? So, because, it's an economy that has its own little currency and stuff. And so if you can figure out ways to cheat by, stealing leaves from the elves or whatever, then you can sell your characters, you can, this stuff has actual real value in the real world. and it's not illegal. Yeah.
In fact, there was a story that posted online on the CSR attack.
Yep.
Bitcoins.
Of course, Bitcoin has an attack against it, he was saying, and that's not an online game, but whatever. That's an online currency. So why am I talking about this? Well, let me tell you why. This is called DLL Inter Positioning. And for those of you who are not geeks, I'm going to try to explain this attack from, 1997, and this used to work against online games. Used to in 2004. Doesn't work anymore against online games, right? So here's the idea. Your program has a main thread loop. It just runs over and over and over and over again. So everybody, this is the program running here. And every once in a while, there's this little call to render world, which, splooshes out the buffer and it paints the screen or whatever. It does some stuff. And we can actually attach a piece of code to that call inside of the computer. Why is that? Whose computer is it? My computer, right? It's a program running on my computer. It's their program, but whose computer? My computer. So I can do whatever I want, like stick a little thingy on there and say whenever that gets called, don't run their code, or actually just go over here and run whatever's in this DLL, right? So we take control of the program temporarily, we do some stuff over here, and then we return control back over there. That's DLL Inter Positioning. It's a attacker in the middle attack. It's 101 type software security stuff. Guess what? That doesn't work in online games. Guess where it does work? Siemens control systems. You know what the super uber elite massive attack against the Siemens thing was? That's it, you guys. That sucks. That's not good. That's bad, right? So here's what we can expect now in the real world, and this is just supposed to be for shocking you by showing you a picture that's even more complicated. Who has a multi-core computer in this room? Just a little joke. Everybody. Who doesn't? There's always like one guy, I have an old one, right? Anybody got an old computer, like more than 4? Nope. Okay, everybody's, yeah, of course you do, sir.
Never threw out the computer.
I don't either. I have every motherboard I've ever owned in my attic, so I bow to you. They don't all have power supplies, but I have the chips, right? So here's our main thread again on this side, okay? Going over here. And now, instead of putting a software breakpoint using something like Microsoft detours, thanks Microsoft, we can put a hardware breakpoint. What's a hardware breakpoint for an Intel chip? Anybody know? What? But you know what you throw? You remember the interrupt number? Come on, dude. Geek out. Come on. Come on. It's not 2 or 4, but rather it's 3, yes. Oh, you guys are quick over there. They beat you, dude. This side wins. All right, so. Yeah, I gave him a huge hint. So you throw a hardware breakpoint. Now, what happens when you throw interrupt 3 on an Intel chip? Here's what happens. It goes, floop, stops running. Now, in design for most security systems, the monitoring system is running on this chip too. So guess what else stops? The monitoring system in online games. The one for World of Warcraft is called, what is it called? The Warden. And we wrote a thing called the Governor, which, gives the Warden just a small little lobotomy. So that the Warden's like, everything's cool here, man, love it, looking great, looks great, whatever, still alive. Right, the code for the Governors in chapter 2. Right, so early chapter. So we stop the world, and while the world stopped, we go over here either to another thread or another virtual machine or another chip, if that's a hypervisor or supervisor, whatever, who cares. And we do some stuff. Don't worry about this complicated stuff. Basically, we have all the state over here in the memory, and we can write an exploit that takes advantage of all this stuff that's already loaded in, what the memory is, where the calls are. We know all that stuff. We build ourselves a little tiny exploit, and we inject it into the universe over here, and then we turn it back on. So here's what happens over there on that chip. It's like, and then Foop wakes up, starts doing some stuff, runs the payload, and it's owned. Now, nobody's writing Rip Van Winkle checkometers or whatever to see how long the chip was stopped. Nobody does that. That's not what happens in, this stuff. In fact, most people that develop systems have a hard time understanding what we call reentrant code. And most people didn't really pay much attention during operating systems class, did they, Sean? Even though they should have. They should have. They should have learned about starvation and, lockout and critical sections and all that stuff. And so, most people sort of believe that their computer program runs something like this. First I do step 1, then I do step 2, then I do step 3, and I check whether X is 4, and it is, so then I do step 5, right, or whatever. And you know what really happens in a computer? First I do step 1, then the entire universe changes. Then I do step 2 with my fingers crossed, hoping that the entire universe didn't change. And then the entire universe changes again. And then I do step 3, counting on the fact that the entire universe didn't change even though it did twice. And then the entire universe changes again, right? So most people that write Java may not even know that Java is a multi-threaded thing. That's worrisome, right? So you want to know what the future attacks look like? If the buffer overflow was the big attack of, the 90s, and it's some stupid thing like cross-site scripting now, or cross-site request forgery, just brain-damagedly stupid thing. The thing in the future is going to be time and state. Time and state, all the operating system stuff we learned, we really need to understand. All right, so this attack is undetectable inside of World of Warcraft, and we can cheat, we can build a botting system on top of this. In fact, there might be some code for that called Bubba's Warcraft Hack. I have no idea where that code might have come from, but it will get you banned now. All right, so anyway, the whole idea is take advantage of the fact that we have multi-core systems. This is a real attack. Was that what we had to use to control the Siemens system? Not even close, man. We're using 1997 for that. So there's a little reality check from a deep geek on Stuxnet. Could it happen again? Are you kidding? Of course, all over the place. It's just easy, easy, easy. So back to the cyber war stuff. Here's my conjecture. I think the problem is that we like to talk a lot about offense. And what I mean by offense is exploiting systems, penetrating systems with cyber attacks, exploiting busted software, doing those things that I just showed you an exploit, right? That's an exploit. That's what we mean by taking advantage of a system that was badly engineered, or they didn't think the right things when they were building it, or whatever. That's offense. We are spending a lot of money on offense in cyber security. Sorry, cyber whatever, cyber war. That's the guys at the U.S. Cyber Command. That's what they're doing. I've actually heard both McConnell and Hayden and others say, we need the cyber equivalent of an F-35. And you're like, great, I'm sure we do. And this is where we say the part about glass houses, right? So we're working really hard on the fastest, most accurate stone throwing ever. But we're sitting in a glass house like everybody else. And that's not so good. We need to be working on, hey, let's have our house be not made of glass. Yeah.
Actually, it's worse than that, because if you look at most of our adversaries, we're more connected than they are.
Yeah, so our glass house is even worse. I tried to work the Three Little Pigs into this talk, which occurred to me last night, but I didn't get around to it. But soon, the next version of this talk is going to have the Three Little Pigs, and you want your house to be straw, or sticks, or bricks. And pretty much right now, we're all like, straw houses are cool, and we built the best big bad wolf ever. Whoa, those things don't go together, right? They don't go together. They don't go together, and nobody's talking about that. Now, when I talk about defense, I'm talking about something different than the word defense as used by the Cyber Command guys. When they talk about defense, they're talking about network operations and making sure systems are patched and having little dudes in uniforms watch some screens because humans are blindingly fast. They're way faster than computers, aren't they? Or is that backwards? Yeah. Yeah, so I love the Cyber Command pictures with the little dude sitting at the screen. It's like, dude, you are so obsolete. Get the hell out of the chair. Seriously, you know? It's crazy. So what does defense really mean? Defense really means building stuff right. Making our houses out of bricks instead of straw. We have to do that because now we're depending on the stuff that we've been building for decades now. We've sort of painted ourselves into a corner with lots of bad software. And, you know, we know that. We knew that. This is not news to us. Is this news, Sean? Sergey, news? It's the same old, it's not really news. It's, you're going to equivocate on that one, surely not. You're behaving yourself quite well. Right, so we have to figure out how to build systems so that they can't just be trivially attacked. It's bad that Siemens control systems today are susceptible to attacks from 1997. Yeah.
I would like to remark that perhaps one of the issues why we've been building houses out of glass recently is that the requirements for online games and for production industrial systems are very different. Because for an online game, if there's a false positive in some detection methodology, some customer gets banned from World of Warcraft. Blizzard loses $50 a month. Big tragedy. Whereas if some detection system introduces even a slight subtle bug in, say, the control systems of a nuclear reactor, people are going to die. And therefore, there was a talk at 28C3 about the German train system and its security measures. And in there, there's absolutely no security whatsoever. You can make a train stop by throwing a 2000 hertz signal. RF field next to it, and the train just stops. But that's because they made it really reliable, and they were not actually focusing on security.
Because stop equals good when you're a train, right?
Not necessarily.
Mostly.
If there's a train right behind you, it might be really bad.
Now you're thinking like what I want you to think like. So I take your point. The economic models are different, but I don't care. The message remains the same. The only way we can solve this problem is by engineering our way out of it. And maybe we have to change the economic incentives. Maybe we have to change the way we approach safety critical systems. But frankly, we've made a lot of progress in software security. I'm going to tell you about some of it later on. And there's no reason that the government and Siemens shouldn't be using that now. They should. Yes?
How big of a problem is it in, as far as software goes, that today's bricks are tomorrow's straw?
Well, that's a very interesting question. I think that's a big problem and a really good question. And in fact, you remember when I was talking about the economic cycle in control systems being 14 years? Well, it's very clear to me that the economic cycle in high tech is getting shorter and shorter. So not only will, today's brick be tomorrow's straw, but tomorrow happens in 10 picoseconds, right? Instead of tomorrow, it's like sooner than you thought. All right, let's keep going. Here's another problem. We like to talk about war because war is so cool. Stuff blows up. That is so cool, So when you're a kid, when you're a boy, you play war, man. I got like guns and you shoot little thingies. Did girls do too? Did you do that too? Yeah. I like you already. All right, so do we play crime? Well, maybe a little, but it's not as cool as war. And war is very, very sexy. If you want to get politicians all excited, talk about war. Don't really talk about crime or espionage so much. I mean, if you talk about what's moving the cyber needle in Congress, it's war. It's not these other two things. And in fact, these other two things are not only much more common than war, like, WikiLeaks, Anonymous, Operation Aurora, that's the Google thing, hello, cyber IP out the door, whatever. That's not as cool as war. They DDoSed a whole country, dude. It was Estonia. We're almost like that, right? So espionage more important, even more important than crime. Cybercrime is where the money is going now. That's where the money is going away, right? That is a serious problem. And there are all sorts of ridiculous estimates. $1 trillion per year. I love it. The guys at CNAS came up with that. Is it true? I don't know. Just divide by 10 if you think it's not, if it's too high. Or 100. It's still a lot, right? Still. Gardner must have said it, right? Here's the interesting thing. This is the problem that we all have as citizens right now living in high-tech world. This is the problem. This is the problem that multinational corporations have, and nation states have the war problem. The cool thing is, the solution is the same. Stop building stuff that's so damn broken. It's the same solution, right? So maybe one of our political moves could be to get them all excited about cyber war so they actually do some building of some stuff that isn't so busted. Although they'd much rather build the cyber equivalent of an F-25, so they're stuck in offense land, so we got to watch out for that tactic. Maybe that's not so good. But you see the point, right? So why is it that it's war? Well, just because it's cool. So let's talk about some stuff that's some stuff that's just wrong. Some metaphors that don't really work very well. Here's my favorite one. Imagine it's 1540. You are on a horse and your body is covered with metal. And your job is to attack the guys that live in that. And you come up to this thing and you go, oh hell, water. Right? That's a really good defense in 1540 when your body covered with metal was the state of the art. Now imagine we had to take that out today. Let's attack the guys in the fort. How do we do it? Well, we put a little blip on the GPS thing and we fire a cruise missile at it. Or maybe we paint it from space. Or there's a million ways. But we don't have to have metal on our body anymore. And you know what? That little lake thingy, whatever, right? Whatever, no big deal. Now, here's the real point of this, though. We have a mentality as human creatures of perimeter defense. Perimeter defense is really very useful if you have a perimeter. Modern software doesn't have a perimeter. We've been busy deleting and erasing and removing and getting rid of perimeters for years. Back in the old days, a computer used to be in a room. And if you were among the very blessed few, you could take your special little cards with holes and you could bow to the high priest of the room controller dudes, and you could put your cards through the window, and if you were lucky, maybe they'd run it. Maybe, if they felt like it, right? That's computer security. Try hacking that. There's like the glass window. They don't even let you fold your damn cards or spindle them, much less mutilate them, none of that. Right, so, and if you drop them, oh, trouble for you. Happened a lot. You probably dropped some cards once, didn't you? Maybe not. You're younger than that. Right, so things have changed. Now we all carry a computer a bajillion times more powerful in our pocket. It's our cell phone. You know, it's just a computer, just a little thing on the net. And software systems that we're designing are what we call massively distributed. A distributed system, who said this? I think it was Les Lamport, is one in which a computer that you didn't even know existed can cause your computer to fail. And that's the way we are now. Like, my cell phone doesn't work. Damn those Verizon guys and their computer, wherever it is. Right? Or T-Mobile or AT&T. Name your favorite. They're all equally bad. Right? So, if we had a perimeter, we could use these perimeter defenses. If we had a way of saying, this is our land and everything out there is the cloudy internet thing and we have this thing between us and them, and actually there was only one connection, maybe you could put a firewall there and maybe it would work. But that paradigm is quickly disappearing. It's going away. You're carrying your device home. Your device is outside the firewall a lot, pretty much all the time. And that's not good. if you're using perimeter defenses. The government still believes perimeter defenses work because they're so far behind. So I went to a meeting at the White House. Obama showed up, which was really cool. We didn't know he was going to, well, he sort of knew. I brought my camera. So it was really cool. It was like, he was, 10 feet away. Wow, so cool. Janet Napolitano got up in front of all these computer security people. Were you in there? And said, you know, I want to catch you up to date in what we've been doing. So we've identified all of the places where all of our agencies are connected to the internet. And we're like, okay, what else did you do? And we've put some firewalls in some of those places, and we've made fewer of them. And we're like, 1996 has just arrived. Really? This was 2008. 1996 arrived for the government in 2008. That's a problem. Now, is it good that they identified that they were connected to the internet? Probably. Is it impressive? Not really. Is it good that they got some firewalls in place? Probably, even though they don't really work. Is it impressive? Not really. We're so far behind. The government is so far behind. And we think, gosh, surely the NSA, surely they're way ahead. They're crypto dudes. Crypto is not security engineering. It's just math, right? So that's just about keeping secrets. That's not about protecting systems, in my view. All right, so that's one broken paradigm right there. Broken paradigm number 2, well, here's another thing that's interesting. The NASCAR effect is what makes it talking about attacks sexy and cool, right? Why do you watch NASCAR? Because you want to see some guy crash his car and die. That's why humans watch it. And that's why they put the number on their truck. I'm from Virginia, so there's a lot of 3s on there, like St. Earnhardt or whatever his name is. And, you know, human beings like to watch disasters. That's why they watch NASCAR. Guess how many people would watch the Volvo car safety channel if we put that on television? Maybe Sergey would watch it.
Funny, I never got to hack cars.
You know what? We can use this NASCAR effect to our advantage sometimes. Like I do write books about how systems break because I think we need to understand that or we won't know how to defend them properly. So I think it's great to talk about attacks and about how things really break, and we should do that. But it should be kind of the bait, right? The sex appeal to actually teach people how to do security engineering. So you get them in with the broken bridge, the Tacoma Narrows Bridge. Anybody ever take mechanical engineering? Yep. What'd they show you on day 1? Bridge shakes self to death. And they go, don't let this happen to your bridge. And you're like, it's only the first day. Don't make me cry. You know what they do in computer science? Hi, welcome to computer science class. Let's write a program called Hello World. Not, people could die. The Therac 25 killed some people. Don't let that happen to your software. Nobody says that. We need to start saying that. Yep.
In fairness, I did get that.
You got that.
Not the first class, but the second.
Well, that's cool. At least you got it. A lot of people never really get that. All right, so the NASCAR effect may be why we like to talk about offense because we can blow some shit up. That's cool. And you know what? We have some really incredibly advanced weapons. We are like kicking some butt on the planet in the United States. We got some pretty cool stuff. You'd like science fiction-y cool. That's cool. It really is cool. But it's, not about defending ourselves. I guess we could destroy the hell out of them. I guess it's this mutually assured. I don't know. It's too tricky for me. I think we need to learn to build stuff better. Here's another problem. The people who are dominating this conversation in Washington today, they're all not old. They're all, I'm old, come on. They're all national security types, right? And a lot of them are from spy land. And the spy guys, they're good at their jobs. They're good at spying. Guess what? It's really helpful if you're a spy, if all the stuff you have to break comes pre-broken. If all the software you have to exploit sucks so much that exploiting it is nigh on trivial. I don't want those guys to be in charge of defending stuff and building software that's hard to break, because that's working at cross purposes. That's absolutely wrong. Why would you have those guys do your engineering? Right, so, who's supposed to do this is the real question. So, cybersecurity, I will admit, is very important to national security, but that's not the only thing it's important to. It's important to some other stuff, like the lights, television, car control, really important stuff. Okay. So what are we going to do? Well, here's the 4 things that we said we should focus on. Number 1, try to build stuff right. Focus on real defense, not some guys in a sock watching a screen defense or firewall procurement defense, but building stuff right defense. Number 2, try to get this public-private partnership, which is political pandering as far as I can tell, to be something meaningful. I tried like hell not to have that bullet in the paper, but Nate made me put it. So we'll let him defend it. I think public-private partnerships are political pandering and they're full of baloney. Now, maybe if in the future of computer security, this is not all we get for software security, but we get more like this, then maybe public-private partnerships will work. That is, right now, software security is such a small part of computer security, small but growing, as I explained before, that if we just do what all of the big corporations selling the $14 billion worth of stuff say, well, if it's bigger, the bigger it is, the more we'll be doing the right thing. Does that make sense? I explained that very badly. Let me say that one more time. All right, remember when I said before that software security is almost a big enough part of computer security that it might be a 1/10 or so of the marketplace? If it's more like half, then maybe public-private partnerships could work because it involves some security engineering instead of just trying to protect the broken stuff from the bad people. Okay, thing number 3. We got to focus on information users instead of plumbing. This whole idea of we're going to build .secure is the dumbest thing I've ever heard in my life. It is just utterly ridiculous. We already have one of those. It's called the SIPRnet, right? And Private Manning showed how effective that is. Not effective, right? Because we decided after 9/11 that we have to connect the dots, so we allowed all privates to connect the dots with all of the cables from the State Department. Because that's what privates should think about? Oh, maybe not, right? So, we got to figure that out. Yes?
That's not a technical failing. I mean, that's a position of trust, and he abused that.
Bing, 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 bing. Yes, correct. Yeah, we set up the people part wrong, right? And yet we would like to pretend that that's a sort of a technical failure, but it wasn't really a technical failure. Or we'd like to pretend that if we had yet another secret internet or a secure internet for the international infrastructure, whatever, called .secure, this is McConnell's big idea, then everything would go away, but we'd still have the people thing, right? Right? And you know what happens when you have 2 boxes on your desk, right? Low and high. Everything goes from low to high, and pretty soon, 4? Okay. It all goes high, though. Everything ends up high.
No, you just do it at home because they make it too difficult. So.
Can't say that. Okay. All right. And the last bullet, also iffy. Maybe civilian agencies should do this instead of the DoD or the spies. So, who? The DHS Keystone Cops? Probably not. So who? I don't know. I don't know the answer to that one. But I don't think the war guys should be doing it. So who should be doing it? I'll leave that to you policy guys to figure out. All right, so now I want to spend just a few minutes talking about the edge of software security. This idea of building things right and trying to get to the point of, describing the field that I've been working on for the last 15 years. This is what I think we should do. The first thing to understand is that the software challenge isn't going away anytime soon. And there are three things that keep it kind of always getting more and more interesting and moving along. Number one is we stuck everything on the net. Remember there used to be this company called Sun? You guys remember that? Got bought by Larry. And there was this CEO dude in McNeely, and he said the network is the computer, and you know what? He was right. And so everything is connected these days, and if you write some code, it's going to be connected someday by someone if it isn't already connected when you write it. Software lives forever, and some dingbat's going to stick it on the net. So expect that. Connectivity means that we can carry out an attack from the comfort of the neighborhood Starbucks, which is what you do if you're going to attack stuff. Don't do it from home. Okay, number two, complexity. This really simple thing called the web browser, that's a Netscape browser for those of you watching. Remember there was a company called Netscape, right? So is a complicated mess under the covers. There's all sorts of stuff going on in a browser, and you're like, dude, that's like a whole operating system. Yes, it is. That's sort of the point, right? But don't tell Microsoft. They haven't figured that out yet. Right, so so here's the problem. Most normals, and a lot of you in the room are normals, not geeks. Most normals, they don't care how stuff works. Who cares? They just want to use their phone. It's a phone. I want to make some calls, surf some web, buy some stuff on the Amazons, you know, whatever. Right, so, yeah. Here's the problem. In order to make something simple enough for the normals to use and like, we have to make it unbelievably complicated behind the scenes. It's this horrible irony. The simpler it is, like iPad, simple. Little 2-year-old uses it. You ever see how that thing is built and how much software there is? It's complicated, big old huge mess. Try securing that. Right, so we have this irony that we have to deal with. And the more complicated things are, the harder it is to keep it in your mind how it works. And if you get confused about how it works, you can't defend it. Right, so we've built things that are so complicated we barely understand how they work, and that makes it easy for attackers to attack them. Because a great attack is just make an assumption go away. We're filled with assumptions when we build complicated systems. We just assume that that thing will be there. We put it there, and later when we go to grab it, it'll be there. But, you know, maybe we put it there and somebody swaps it out for a new thing, and we just grab the thing and we eat it, and it's the wrong thing. Yeah. So number two is complexity and the trinity of trouble. And then the last thing is sort of a complicated thing. You know, we have these modern systems like Java and .NET, and they're extensible systems. And in fact, the whole idea of software is a vector of extensibility for computers. If you think about a Turing machine, for example, the whole tape thing takes a universal machine and binds it into a specific particular machine. Theoretically, that's the whole idea. And so we built these systems to be extendable. And now modern systems are even worse because we have a system where we can take a class from God knows where and we can just instantiate it in the environment, and boom, the world changed. We didn't test it with that stuff. And that happens all the time, right? So is it good that you can dynamically update software? Probably, but does that mean it was the same software you were running yesterday? Nope. So did you test it yet? Nope. Who did? I don't know. Google, maybe? Who knows? Right, so I would love to see some theoretical work. Who was the theory guy this morning? Is he here? Not here? Too bad. I would like to see some computer science theorists take a look at the problem of making machines that have less power, that aren't universal computers, do some stuff. Because you know what we've done? We built universal machines, and then we get mad when they do some stuff. We're like, we're calling that malware. It's like, well, why the hell does the machine do that anyway if it's malware? Why don't we make a machine that can't do that? Or maybe we should shrink wrap the theoretical expressibility to the smallest possible packet, the smallest possible thing. We've talked about this. I know you're working on this. So this is important stuff because now we have these machines that do whatever and we get mad when they do the whatever part. All right, so that makes the thing interesting. Here's a little truism. If you go out in the world and you talk to developers, which I do all the time, talked to probably 10,000 last year, you say, hey, who's planning on having more code at the end of the quarter? They're all like, yeah, me. That's what I get paid to do. More code's good. I get bonus for that, right? Who's planning on having less bugs at the end of the quarter? Oh, yeah, me too, yeah. Those people are on crack. They're going to have more code and less bugs? They're crazy. That's not going to happen because the more code you have, the more bugs you have. Now, we are getting better at building software properly. We're getting better at it. The defect density ratio of modern software is going down. Microsoft software bugs per square inch number going down. That's good. We actually know how to do it a little bit better. We're getting better all the time. The problem is we're growing software. The pile's getting bigger way faster. So let me try to make this as simple as possible. Square inches, bugs per square inch, trending in the correct direction. But we're building more square miles of code than ever before. So if you just stand back and look at the sheer cardinality of the number of bugs, it's going up. So dumb people say, you guys have been working on software security a lot, and the bug pile's growing. So you should stop doing that. Those are dumb people. We have to make the dumb people stop getting any airtime, right? Instead, what we have to say is, yes, well, maybe we should build less code. Maybe we should have a department of deletion. Anybody a deleter? Nope, I'm a developer. Why don't you become a deleter? Actually, I know a company where they ran around deleting code. It was incredibly useful. They killed huge amounts of bugs. It's great. Yeah, delete code. Now, this guy, Dan Gear, who gave a talk here, 2003? I saw him on the wall in the coffee room or whatever. He's also from Tennessee, and he also raises pigs. There are two of us. Right, so Dan wrote this paper that got him fired from At Stake, I guess after he gave the talk? Slightly? Like slightly after? Right, and he had this conjecture in the talk, which was more code, more bugs. And I said, that's great, Dan. Here are the data. And I gave him the data. I gave him this data from CERT, and I gave him this data, which is the Microsoft code pile, showing the growth from 2.5 million lines of Windows 3.1 to XP, which was 40 million lines. Of course, Vista is even more than that. It's probably up here, but nobody cares because nobody uses that. Yeah, and Windows 8, like 6 people use that. So that's way up here. Right, so you can actually see the correlation kind of by looking at it. But I said, here are the data, Dan, see if they correlate. And guess what? If you ever ask somebody with a PhD in biostatistics to correlate two sets of numbers, well, duh. So you can read about that in Chapter 1 of Software Security if you're interested. Suffice it to say that it's true. The more code we have, the more bugs we have right now. And we're busy building more bugs all the time. Okay. Around 2006, we started saying in software security, not only should we build systems properly, but here's how to do it. You should review your code. You should do an architecture analysis. You should get some metal-faced boys to do some hacking. All these things that you should interject into your software development lifecycle. 2006, that was a pretty new idea. We're well past that. I don't really have time to talk about those things right now. Here's the state of the practice now. A lot of people were coming up with different methodologies for how to do software security. And it was sort of like methodology of the day. It was mushrooms after a spring rain, right? So Microsoft had their way. I got the Touchpoints way. There was Clasp way. There's like a lot of new ways were coming out. And I was at a technical advisory board meeting at a company called Fortify. And some guy had written a new software security methodology, and he presented it to the technical advisory board, which included people like Fred Schneider, and Fred was like, shot hose all over it. And we started talking about, why did you pick that? Why do you think that would work? Oh, well, I've done it once, and so surely everyone can do it that way, which was the state of software security back then. Well, I know a bunch of people who do this professionally all day. You know some of them, like Steve Lipner. Runs the Trustworthy Computing Initiative at Microsoft. So he was in charge of software security. He's been in charge of that for 10 years, right? And there's a Steve in a lot of different companies. And so I picked 9 that had friends of mine who were running software security and said, hey, we're going to do some science. We're coming to gather some data from you about your software security initiative. You in? And they said, yep, we're in. Come on over. So we went and gathered a whole bunch of data, did some interviews, did some ice core samples, gathered a bunch of data, and then we built a model describing the data. Let me say that one more time. First, we gathered the data, and then we built a model describing the data. Now, computer scientists usually do it the other way around, which is, I built a cool thing, and then I'm going to go out and get some data to sort of try to justify it, kind of, sort of, right? Or, I can prove that my system works because I took some broken software, and lo and behold, goat sacrifice even works because some of the blood squirted on a little piece of code and, you know, whatever. So almost everything works. And if you look at the software engineering literature in particular, you see an awful lot of that. So we go to these 9 companies, we gather a bunch of data, we build this model. Now we have 42 companies. Actually, we got 48 companies in this model. Here are some of them. See you later. There's Google and Microsoft in the same study. And who else we got? We got the biggest bank in the world and the second biggest bank in the world. We got guys who build cell phone guts. We have these people who do every transaction on Wall Street, like $4 quadrillion worth a year. Quadrillion has a lot of zeros. I forget how many. We have these guys. This is my favorite one. Intel allows us to use their name, but not their logo. So I made a new logo up for them. We even have some German dudes. Look, see the German dudes? That's good. Yep. And, oh yeah, these guys, they do just a few transactions on planet Earth. Right? So these are the people that are participating in this study, and what we can do now is gather some data and start comparing firms against their peers. And I'm not going to go into the details of this because I don't have time to do it right now. But if you're interested in these data, it's all free at bsim.com. We put it out under the Creative Commons. Now this is an interesting thing because software security used to be, do it this way because I'm a noisy guy and I said so. I know because I'm one of the noisy guys, right? But we're changing it to, hey, this seems to work for these companies, so why don't you see how you compare to them? We have 19 banks, we have 12 huge software houses, you know, and they can sort of say, here's where I stand next to the pack. You know, there's nothing quite as powerful as showing this to a CSO, a chart like that, and going, this is all the firms that we've studied so far, and when it comes to architecture analysis, you're a little behind. And they go, ooh, what's that mean? How do I fix that? Right, so you can get a high resolution view of that too. There are actually 109 activities that we found in our data collection thing. And we built this model, and then we added some more companies, and we revised the model just a smidgen to reflect the data, and then we got 30 companies. And we revised the model after running statistical analysis because we had 30 companies so we could do statistics. And it holds statistical water and everything. And now we're up to 50 companies just about. That'll be the next version. We're going to revisit the model again based on the data from 50 companies. And the model, of course it changes. Of course, you know, things come and go. Certain activities come and go. We've actually collected data from 12 companies over time, 18 months apart, and we can see how their software security initiative evolves. Now remember, this is a way of comparing what's going on in large corporations to other large corporations and some small companies too. So we're beginning to develop a science for this stuff, just beginning. Yep.
It's striking that slide you just put up, connected to our lunch conversation.
Yeah.
If you or someone like you were going to try to use the fear of liability to coerce companies to have better internal standards,
yeah,
you could imagine that slides like that and
yeah,
data like that could be used ex post facto by
yeah,
folks who suffered losses to say that you were negligent relative to your peers.
that's right.
That's the cudgel you can use, or
Yeah.
somebody can use.
Yeah, that's exactly right. I'm not sure I want to do that
Right,
yet, because the field is so nascent that it just struck us that we don't have to do it by sticking our finger in the wind anymore. Now we can do it by gathering data and comparing belly buttons. The coolest thing about this work, the people that used to run software, that still run software security at all these companies, they didn't know each other. And we had a couple of conferences, and now they call each other up. Hey, dude, said the guy from Adobe to Steve Lipner, I seem to be above the fold on the Wall Street Journal again. This sucks. I remember when that happened to you. How'd you get those guys off your back? How'd you turn that thing around? And you know what? Steve has some stories about how. That's really cool. These guys are learning from each other, and we're changing the discipline and evolving. It's really cool. We're getting ready to run our first European edition of a conference, because sometimes the Europeans come to our side of the pond, but a lot of them couldn't afford it. And you know, the way things are going now, even less of them will be able to afford it in Europe. So we're going to go run a thing in Amsterdam. Amsterdam's a great place to have a conference, I'm pretty sure. Okay, what about the government? There's the government. The government's way behind. This is government security right here, you know. Little security gate and no fence. So you just drive around the gate. I gave a talk about the BSIM at Joe Jarzenbeck's software assurance meeting. I usually go there every 4 years or so, give him a talk, and I put that slide up. And you know what? Nobody disagreed. They all said, yeah, damn, we are behind. That's not good, right? Guess what? We live in a democracy. We should demand better. It's us. It's our fault. If we're not asking for the right stuff, how can we complain? It's us, right? Those people represent us. So we have to get on that and fix that problem. Okay, so that's kind of the talk in a nutshell. Now, let's address cyber war by building stuff right. Let's stop focusing on stone throwing and start building our stuff out of bricks, even if the bricks turn out to be straw next week. Okay, here's some places where you can go to get some more free stuff. I write a monthly security column. I've been doing it for 5 years, but I just moved it over to Search Security last month. So I owe them a new column in about 2 days, which is a bummer because I got to hurry up and write it. We have a blog like everybody else, but our blog has a cool name. There's this podcast. We've got about 8,000 regular listeners to that podcast now, which is pretty cool. I think it would be fun to do a policy one. Maybe we should talk about that. And we've never done one, have we? We got to fix that, dude. Right, so there's this magazine called IEEE Security and Privacy Magazine. It's interesting because it's peer-reviewed, and it's quasi-scientific in a sense that it's peer-reviewed. I mean, it's not a journal or anything, but it's also relevant sometimes to real-world stuff. And there's sort of a very small intersection between academic research and computer security and what could be used by someone in the real world. And if it exists, it usually shows up in this magazine. I know that Dartmouth has an online subscription to the IEEE stuff, right? Yep, so if you have questions about that, ask Sean. He can credential you up. There's this book that I wrote. I like when people read it. If everybody in here bought a copy, I would get like $7. So get on that, right? And here's the main thing. We have a company of 200 people, and we have 20 openings right now. That is a problem I do not like to have. So if you'd rather get paid more to do stuff that's even cooler than you're doing now in school, let Michelle know and have some free pizza, right? At 6:15. Where is it? 125 Haldeman, which means absolutely nothing to me. Okay, 125 Haldeman is the secret code. Okay, that also, at this point, it's pretty close nearby. All right, so now we're officially done. Thank you very much.